Hello, welcome to Do You Know U.S.? Today we'll be talking about imperialism. As the 19th century came to a close, many voices cried for American expansionism to match that of the imperialistic ambitions of Europe and Japan. The dream for global destiny is justified by such logic as expansion of overseas markets, the desire to have a stronger navy, and to spread Christianity to other known populations. Eventually, this expansionism led to conflict, in which when the Spanish-American War broke out in 1898, in the years immediately following the Civil War, the United States aggressively sought out new territories to acquire and economically control. In 1867, the U.S. purchased Alaska from the Russians. During the same year, the Midway Islands were also annexed as the U.S. wanted to search for potential military bases in the Pacific Ocean region. However, the U.S. did not partake in imperialistic adventures until the 1890s. This is because America was still expanding westward. Rapid industrial growth, urban growth, and a large influx of immigrants kept America occupied, and since most of the men in power were veterans of the Civil War, they didn't desire any further warfare that imperialism can bring. Virtually no politician spoke of increased imperialistic adventures when campaigning in this era. An initial indication that Americans' attitudes towards the use of force abroad was first demonstrated by their actions in Hawaii. The United States specifically was interested in Hawaiian sugar plantations. In 1887, a deal was struck allowing sugar from the islands to be imported into America duty-free, which stimulated the sugar trade in Hawaii. Sugar planters in Hawaii exerted tremendous economic and political power in which they forced the king to put political power in their hands. In 1891, the king passed away, to be replaced by his sister, Queen Liliuokalani. At this point in time, planters in Hawaii, along with U.S. Senate members, saw economic advantages in turning Hawaii into a U.S. protectorate.
However, the Queen vigorously rejected this, for her goal was to greatly reduce the influence of foreign countries like the U.S.
In 1893, pro-American sugar planters, assisted by American Marines, overthrew the Queen, declared Hawaii to be a republic, and requested Hawaii to be annexed by the U.S. Controversy arose regarding the U.S. role in annexing Hawaii. President Grover Cleveland sent a commission to Hawaii to get a consensus of what their citizens desired. So since many supported the Queen, Cleveland opposed the annexation. It wasn't until President McKinley took office declaring that it was manifest destiny that the United States controlled Hawaii. Thus, Congress later approved annexation specifically for a future military base, as well as a domestic producer of sugar. Sugar, yes, please. Won't you come and put it down on me? In a similar way, American economic interests increased involvement with China during this time period. The possibility of investment in China would cause Secretary of State John Hay to ask European leaders for an open-door policy in China in 1899, which would allow all foreign nations, including the U.S., to establish trading relations with China. You got a friend in me. By the 1890s, some industrial leaders feared that the United States would soon produce more than it could consume. Other influential Americans stated that it was important for political reasons that America expanded because bases would be needed in the Pacific for the future. The Naval Act of 1900 authorized the construction of battleships that could be clearly offensive in nature. A major supporter of naval expansion was Captain Alfred T. Mahan, who in 1890 wrote The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, which states that to be economically successful, America must gain new markets abroad. The Navy would have to be expanded to accomplish this. Several other factors accounted for the increased American interest in foreign frontiers in the 1890s, such as the concept of social Darwinism and the fact that a new generation of Americans, less affected by the horrors of the Civil War, were now in positions of power in Washington, D.C. In this splendid little war, America was able to fight against European power with little military power. The steps leading to this war began in 1868 when Cuban colonists revolted against the Spanish, who controlled the island. The Spanish made some efforts to control the efficiency of their operations in Cuba, but generally failed in their promises of allowing more self-government on the island. In 1895, an economic depression caused by falling sugar and tobacco prices hit the native population especially, and another revolt took place. Americans didn't initially support the rebellion. The Spanish sent in a force of 150,000 troops and instituted a policy of reconcentration, which sent civilians, including women and children who, Spanish thought might be potential allies of the rebels, into heavily guarded camps. Conditions of these camps were disturbing, in which an estimated 225,000 people died in them in 2 years. The Cubans pressured America to intervene on the side of the rebels, despite objections from both Cleveland and McKinley, by destroying American economic interests in Cuba, such as sugar mills. Several American newspapers practiced the most lurid forms of yellow journalism when dealing with events in Cuba. Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and William Randolph Hearst's New York Morning Journal sent numerous reporters and illustrators to Cuba to capture sensationalized stories. As a result of these stories, jingoism developed in America, which combined an intense American nationalism with a desire for advantage abroad. On February 15, 1898, the USS Maine was sunk under unknown motives, which led New York papers to banner headlines to call for Americans to remember the Maine. On February 25th, without the approval of his boss, Theodore Roosevelt cabled all of the commanders in the Pacific to be ready for immediate combat against the Spanish. When President McKinley discovered this, he took back all of these messages except for Admiral George Dewey, who was ordered to attack the Spanish fleet in the Philippines if war broke out in Cuba. After sending a list of demands that the Spanish had to meet to avoid war, McKinley sent a message to Congress on April 11, 1898, in favor of the American intervention in Cuba. American efforts to organize the army to go into Cuba were woefully inefficient. Theodore Roosevelt resigned his position in the Naval Department to lead the Rough Riders up San Juan Hill in the most famous event of the war.
He says, I'm going up this hill, and I'm gonna defeat these Spanish forces. Follow me. And if you turn around, I will shoot you.
America lost 2,500 men in this war, the vast majority from malaria or food poisoning. Only 400 died in battle. The decisive moment of the war for Americans was in the 7 hours when Admiral Dewey destroyed the Spanish fleet in the Pacific, in which every Spanish Atlantic fleet was destroyed. The Treaty of Paris ended the war. The reparations of the war was Spain recognizing the independence of Cuba and for a payment of $20 million to give the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam over to the United States. America criticized Spain for the way it controlled Cuba, yet many in America did not want Cuba to be totally free either. A dilemma arose consisting of how to combine imperialistic intentions with the deep-seated American beliefs in liberty and self-government. Cuban independence in Congress had inserted the Teller Amendment, which stated that America would not annex Cuba under any circumstances. President McKinley authorized that the Cubans be ruled by an American military government, which was in place until 1901. He also insisted that Cubans agree to all the provisions of the Platt Amendment, which stated that Cuba could not enter into agreements with other countries without the approval of the United States. The United States had the rights to intervene in Cuban affairs when necessary, and that America would be given 2 naval bases on the Cuban mainland. The Platt Amendment remained in force until the early 1930s. The debate in America over what to do with the Philippines was a much more intense one. Many Americans had second thoughts over controlling the Philippines since the Filipinos seemed a world away and were not like us. All the most basic arguments of the merits of imperialism were debated in the aftermath of the Spanish-American War. An anti-imperialist league was formed in 1898 with Mark Twain, the author of The Gilded Age, which was coined to label the 19th century America, and William Jennings Bryan, presidential candidate defeated by William McKinley in the election of 1896, as charter members. Some negative aspects of imperialism consisted of huge financial costs, fear of other countries taking the jobs of American workers, and an increase of racist attitudes. In the end, President McKinley supported American control of the Philippines, stating that if the Americans didn't enter, civil war was likely there, and that the Philippines were simply unfit for self-government. After the treaty was ratified in February of 1899, nearly 4,500 American soldiers and 200,000 Filipinos had been killed during rebellions and disputes. After the Spanish-American War, many regarded America as one of the major world powers. McKinley was killed during the first year of his second term as president by an anti-Archist. The next day, political boss Mark Hanna lamented, "Now that damned cowboy is president of the United States."
Hey now, you're an all-star, get your game on, go play.
One of Roosevelt's most cherished goals was the construction of the Panama Canal, which would link the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean with strategic and economic benefits. In 1902, the U.S. bought the rights from the French building company to construct the land, but this agreement was opposed by the Colombians who controlled the territory. After a revolt, the U.S. was the first to recognize Panama as an independent country. By the terms of the Ay-Bunivaria Treaty of 1904, the U.S. received permanent rights and sovereignty over a 10-mile wide area to build the canal, and Panama was given $10 million in return. The canal was finally completed in 1914. American businesses could now ship their goods faster and cheaper, even though the canal deepened the suspicion of many Latin American countries toward the U.S. In 1904, he announced the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine to Congress, which stated that the U.S. had the right to intervene in any country in the Western Hemisphere that did things harmful to the United States, or if the threat of intervention by countries outside of the hemisphere was present. The Roosevelt Corollary strengthened American control over Latin America, justified numerous American interventions in Latin American affairs in the 20th century, and increased the Yankee go-home sentiment throughout the region. For instance, when Santo Domingo, present-day Dominican Republic, government went bankrupt and European countries threatened to intervene to collect their money, the U.S. gave a payment to them to keep the Europeans out. Theodore Roosevelt won the Nobel Peace Prize for his mediation between the Japanese and the Russians after the Russo-Japanese War of 1904. Eventually, William Howard Taft replaces Roosevelt in office and disregards all of his policies to establish a dollar diplomacy, which would be hotly debated throughout the 20th century.
Hi, my name is Bob, and I approve this message.
I got the magic in me. Every time I touch that track, it turns into gold. Everybody knows I got the magic in me. When I hit the floor, the girls come snapping at me. Now everybody wants a blast of magic, 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 oh. I got the magic in me.
Next trick that I let tempo blow your mind. Pick a verse, any verse, I hypnotize you with every line. I'll need a volunteer. How about you with the eyes? Come on down to the front, stay right here and don't be shy. I have you time traveling